The Great Hall of the Galactic Tribunal was the largest room had ever seen. Its walls stretched up so high that clouds actually formed near the ceiling. Crystal pillars as thick as buildings held everything in place. Thousands of aliens from dozens of species sat in floating seats that circled around a single platform in the center. Stood on that platform, his hands locked in magnetic cuffs that hummed with energy. He was 34 years old, a former engineer in Earth's military, and right now he was very far from home. The aliens around him looked nothing like each other. Some had scales, some had fur, some had no skin at all, just floating masses of light and energy. But they all shared one thing in common. They all stared at with a mixture of curiosity and disgust, like he was an insect that had crawled into their fancy dinner party. The chief arbiter sat on a throne above everyone else. He was a creature, nearly 3 meters tall, with a hard shell that clicked when he moved. His compound eyes reflected thousands of tiny images of all at once. "The accused will hear the charges," the chief arbiter announced. His voice echoed through the hall like thunder. A holographic screen appeared in front of. Images began to play. He saw himself leading a team through the corridors of a warship. He saw the explosion that followed. He saw the bodies of alien soldiers floating in the vacuum of space. "Of Earth," the arbiter continued, "you are charged with the destruction of the vessel Eternal Dawn. You are charged with the deaths of 412 soldiers. You are charged with acts of war against the Dominion." Wanted to speak. He wanted to explain that the had attacked first, that his ship was a rescue vessel, not a warship, that those 400 soldiers had been trying to capture human civilians for slave markets. But his translator implant buzzed in his ear, warning him to stay silent. In this court, the accused had no right to speak until the verdict was given. The trial lasted 7 hours, stood the entire time, his legs aching, his throat dry. Various aliens took turns describing humans as dangerous primitives who had no place among civilized species. One prosecutor called humanity a virus. Another called them animals who had somehow learned to build spaceships. Finally, the chief arbiter raised one of his many arms for silence. "The tribunal has reached a decision," he said. "For crimes against the Dominion, for the murder of its soldiers, and for the threat that humanity poses to galactic peace, the accused is sentenced to Sector Null." The reaction was immediate. Gasps filled the hall. Several aliens actually stood up from their seats. Even the guards who held chains took a step back, as if being close to him was suddenly dangerous. Did not understand. He had expected execution. He had expected prison. But from the reactions around him, this sentence was somehow worse. "Sector Null," whispered an alien beside him, its voice filled with horror. "The Death Planet." His translator began feeding him information. Sector Null was a planet on the edge of known space. 300 years ago, the Dominion had designated it as the ultimate prison, but there were no cells on Sector Null, no guards, no walls. The planet itself was the punishment. Its atmosphere was toxic. Its wildlife was deadly. Its surface was covered in volcanic fields and acid lakes. The Dominion used it to dispose of their worst criminals, their failed experiments, and their biological weapons. Prisoners were dropped from orbit with nothing but basic clothes. They were never picked up. The average survival time on Sector Null was 11 hours. "This is wasteful," a reptilian delegate hissed from somewhere in the crowd. "Humans sell well in the labor markets. This one looks strong." "Let the Null have him," another voice replied. "One less problem species to worry about." As guards began to drag him from the platform, caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Ambassador sat in the small section reserved for Earth's representatives. She was a woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled back tightly, her expression perfectly calm and diplomatic. But her hands were not calm. Her fingers moved in small, precise gestures. It was an old code, one their grandparents had used during the Korean Unification Wars, when electronic communication could not be trusted. Survive, her fingers said, "We are coming." Could not respond without giving her away. So he simply met her eyes for one brief moment and nodded, so slightly that no one else would notice. The guards pulled him through massive doors and into a long corridor. Other prisoners were already being loaded onto transport ships. Most of them were aliens, their species unfamiliar to. Some were crying. Some were screaming. One was laughing madly, already broken by the knowledge of what awaited them. Was silent. The transport ship was old and ugly, designed for cargo rather than passengers. The guards shoved him into a metal seat and locked his restraints to the floor. Around him, 30 other prisoners did the same. The air smelled like fear and despair. An officer walked down the aisle, checking the restraints. When he reached, he stopped and leaned close. "I had friends on the Eternal Dawn," the officer said quietly. "Good friends. I hope Sector Null takes its time with you, human. I hope you suffer for days before something finally eats you." Looked up at the officer. His face showed nothing. "I have survived worse than you can imagine," he said calmly. "Your friends attacked a civilian vessel. They got what they deserved." The officer hit him. The blow snapped his head to the side and filled his mouth with blood. But he did not cry out. He simply turned back to face the officer and smiled, his teeth red. The officer hit him again, and again. By the third blow, other guards were pulling him away, warning him that damaged cargo meant paperwork. Sat in his seat, blood dripping down his chin, and thought about Ambassador's message. "Survive. We are coming." He thought about his training. 15 years in Earth's survival corps, learning to live in the most hostile environments his home planet could offer. Deserts, jungles, Arctic wastelands, the bottom of the ocean. Each one had tried to kill him. Each one had failed. He thought about humanity's history. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years. Plagues that killed half the population. Wars that burned entire continents. And through it all, humans had survived. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the fastest, but because they simply refused to die. The transport ship's engines roared to life. Through a small window, watched as the tribunal station grew smaller and smaller. Stars streaked past as the ship jumped into faster-than-light travel. Somewhere ahead of them, Sector Null waited, the deadliest planet in the galaxy. The place where the Dominion sent people to disappear. Closed his eyes and began to plan. He did not know what awaited him on that poisoned world. He did not know if Ambassador's rescue mission would ever arrive. He did not even know if he would survive his first hour on the surface. But he knew one thing for certain. The Dominion had made a terrible mistake. They thought they were throwing away garbage. They thought they were disposing of a problem. They had no idea that they were about to give a human something far more valuable than freedom. They were about to give him a challenge. And humans, as the galaxy would soon learn, were very good at challenges. The transport ship flew on through the darkness of space, carrying its cargo of condemned souls toward a planet of death. And in his seat, blood still wet on his face, smiled. Let them come, he thought. Let all of it come. He was ready. The drop pod hit the ground like a meteor. Metal screamed against rock. Fire and smoke filled the tiny cabin. Felt his bones rattle inside his body as the impact threw him against his restraints. Then everything went still. For a moment, just breathed. He was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. The pod's emergency systems beeped weakly, warning him that the air outside was toxic, that the temperature was dangerous, that he should stay inside and wait for rescue. There would be no rescue, not from the Dominion anyway. Hit the release on his restraints and kicked open the pod's door. Hot air rushed in, carrying the smell of sulfur and something else, something rotten. He stepped out onto the surface of Sector Null and looked around. The landscape was hell. Black volcanic glass covered the ground in every direction, sharp enough to cut through boots. In the distance, geysers shot boiling water and acid into the sky. The sun was a dim red ball hidden behind layers of poisonous clouds. There was no green anywhere, no blue, just black and red and gray stretching to the horizon. Had 45 seconds of clean air in his lungs. He needed to move. His prison uniform was thin and useless, designed to humiliate rather than protect. But the drop pod itself was made of metal and plastic. Within 2 minutes, had torn off a section of the pod's outer shell and wrapped it around his face as a crude filter. It would not last long, but it would buy him time. Something screamed in the distance. Turned toward the sound. A creature was moving across the volcanic field, fast and low to the ground. It had too many legs and its body was covered in spines. Even from 100 meters away, could see its teeth. He ran. The volcanic glass cut through his shoes within seconds. Blood mixed with ash as he sprinted across the deadly ground. Behind him, the creature's screams grew closer. Other sounds joined it. More creatures, drawn by the noise of his landing. Ahead spotted a crack in the ground, a cave entrance maybe, or maybe a death trap. He had no time to think about it. He threw himself into the crack just as something huge slammed into the ground behind him. Claws scraped against rock. Hot breath filled the narrow space, but the creature was too big to follow. Crawled deeper into the darkness. The cave system was extensive. Tunnels branched off in every direction, carved by ancient lava flows. Moved carefully, testing each step before putting his weight down. One wrong move could send him falling into an underground pit or stepping into a pool of acid. But the air here was better. Still bad, but breathable without a filter. Pulled the metal sheet away from his face and took his first real breath since landing. That was when he noticed the light. The walls of the cave were covered in fungus that glowed a soft blue color. It was beautiful, actually, in a strange way. Like stars scattered across rock instead of sky. Straining kicked in immediately. Glowing fungus could mean many things: food source, poison, medicine. He scraped a small sample off the wall and touched it to his inner wrist where the skin was sensitive. Then he waited. No burning, no itching, no immediate reaction. Good, that meant it probably was not deadly to touch. Whether it was safe to eat was a different question entirely. He continued deeper into the caves. By the end of his first hour on Sector Null, had mapped 3 possible exits from the cave system. He had found a source of water that dripped from the ceiling, cloudy but possibly drinkable after filtering. He had identified 2 types of cave-dwelling creatures, both small, both more afraid of him than he was of them. And he had found his first tool. The volcanic glass that cut his feet so badly was actually perfect for making weapons. It could be shaped into blades sharper than steel. Spent 30 minutes carefully breaking off pieces and grinding them against rock until he had something that resembled a knife. It was not much, but it was something. By hour 12, had his first kill. One of the creatures that had chased him earlier tried to enter the cave through a different opening. It was smaller than the others, probably young. Waited in the shadows, his glass knife ready. When the creature passed his hiding spot, he struck. The blade went through the creature's throat like it was made of paper. Hot blood, bright green in color, sprayed across the cave wall. The creature made a horrible gurgling sound and then went still. Stood over the body and felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, just a calm recognition that he had done what was necessary. Now he had meat, now he had materials. The creature's hide was thick and tough. Its bones were hollow but strong. Its teeth were longer than his fingers. He got to work. By hour 24, had shelter, weapons, and food. His cave had been transformed into a small camp. The creature's hide hung across the entrance, blocking wind and keeping out smaller predators. Its bones had been turned into needles and hooks. Its teeth were now the tips of 3 throwing spears. The acid rain started around hour 30. Heard it first, a hissing sound that filled the air outside his cave. When he looked out, he saw drops of liquid falling from the sky that burned holes in the volcanic glass wherever they landed. Any other species would have stayed inside and waited for it to pass. Went collecting. He had noticed something during his exploration. Certain mineral deposits in the cave reacted strangely when exposed to moisture. They bubbled and fizzed, and when he mixed them with the acid rain, something interesting happened. The acid became neutral, harmless, drinkable. It took him 7 attempts and 3 burns on his hands to get the mixture right, but by hour 36, had invented something that no prisoner in Sector Null's history had ever created: clean water on demand. Hour 42 brought his first visitor. Heard movement at the cave entrance. He grabbed his spear and pressed himself against the wall, ready to fight, but the sound that came next was not a predator's growl. It was a voice. "Human," the voice said in broken common tongue. "Not kill, please, talk." Hesitated, then slowly he moved toward the entrance. The creature standing outside was like nothing he had seen before. It had 4 arms and skin that looked like old leather. Its face had no nose, just 2 slits where nostrils should be. Its eyes were huge and yellow and filled with something recognized: fear, hope, desperation. "My name is," the creature said. I have been here 3 months. I watch you since you land. You are different from others." Lowered his spear slightly. Different how? His 4 arms spread wide in what might have been a shrug or might have been a gesture of surrender. "Others land, others die. Fast, very fast. You land, you kill, you build, you survive. In 40 hours, you do what I take 3 months to learn." Studied the alien for a long moment. Was thin, clearly starving. His leather skin was cracked and dry. He had no weapons, no tools, nothing but the rags on his body. "Why come to me?" asked. "Why not just watch?" "Because alone I die soon," said simply. "Together maybe we both live. This is math, simple math." Thought about it. Every survival manual he had ever read said the same thing. Humans were social creatures. They survived in groups. One person could only watch one direction at a time. One person could only stay awake so many hours before exhaustion took over. He stepped aside and gestured toward the cave. "Come in," he said. "We need to talk about what else lives on this planet." His yellow eyes went wide with something like wonder. Then, quickly, before could change his mind, he scuttled into the cave on his 4 legs. That night, sitting by a small fire made from dried fungus, learned everything new about Sector Null. The predators, the poisons, the other prisoners scattered across the surface, most of them already dead. And he began to form a plan. The Dominion had sent him here to die. They had given him nothing but the clothes on his back and dropped him into the deadliest environment in the galaxy. But they had also given him something else. They had given him other survivors, other outcasts, other people who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. By hour 72, was no longer just surviving. He was recruiting. 6 months had passed since fell from the sky. In the monitoring station orbiting high above Sector Null, Supervisor stared at her screens and tried to understand what she was seeing. The station was old and officially abandoned. The Dominion had stopped watching the Death Planet 200 years ago when it became clear that nothing interesting ever happened there. Prisoners landed. Prisoners died. The cycle repeated forever. But worked for Dominion intelligence. And Dominion intelligence never stopped watching anything. "This is impossible," she muttered, clicking her sharp teeth together in frustration. "Run the scan again." Her subordinate, a young officer named, obeyed immediately. The thermal imaging system hummed as it focused on a specific region of the planet's surface. Colors bloomed across the screen: red for heat, blue for cold, and in the center of the image, a cluster of warm bodies that should not exist. 43 life signs, reported, his voice shaking. All concentrated in one location. The human is still among them. Leaned closer to the screen. The image showed walls, actual walls built from volcanic rock and predator bones. A compound had been constructed in the middle of the deadliest terrain on the planet. Inside, beings moved with purpose. Some carried tools, some carried weapons, some stood at positions along the walls, clearly acting as guards. 6 months, whispered. The human survived 6 months, and not just survived, he built something. She pulled up the historical records. In 300 years of Sector Null's existence, the longest any prisoner had survived was 47 days. A warrior named, dropped for political crimes against the Dominion. Even he had eventually disappeared from the sensors, assumed dead. But there was on the screen, very much alive, standing beside the human and pointing at something in the distance. How asked, how is any of this possible? Did not answer. She was too busy reading the data streaming across her secondary screens. The compound had some kind of water purification system. It had food storage. It had what looked like a medical area where injured prisoners were being treated. The human had created civilization out of nothing. Far below, on the surface of that poisoned world, stood on the wall he had helped build and watched the sunrise. It was ugly, as always. The red sun struggled through layers of toxic clouds, casting everything in a bloody light. But it was light. It was a new day, and his people were still alive. His people, the thought still felt strange to him. It had started with, then two more, then a group of who had been dumped in an acid lake and somehow crawled out alive. Then a massive creature called a who could carry 10 times his body weight. Then a swarm of tiny beings called the Vex who shared one mind across 100 small bodies. Each new arrival brought skills, knowledge, stories of what the Dominion had done to them, what crimes, real or imagined, had landed them in this hell. And each new arrival found the same thing waiting for them. A human who did not care what species they were, what they had done, or what they looked like. A human who only asked one question. Can you work? If the answer was yes, they were welcome. If the answer was no, they were still welcome, because even the weak could learn and even the sick could recover. Climbed down from the wall and walked through the compound. Around him, the morning routine was beginning. A team headed out for hunting, their weapons crafted from the bones and teeth of things that had tried to kill them. A scientist worked on improving the water filtration system. Her aquatic body kept moist by a suit had helped design. A group of moved heavy stones to reinforce the western wall, which had been damaged by a predator attack 2 days ago. Everyone had a job, everyone had a purpose, and everyone knew what would happen if they stopped working together. They would die alone, just like the Dominion wanted. Human leader, a voice called out, turned to see a Vex swarm approaching, their 100 tiny bodies moving as one. They spoke with a voice that came from everywhere at once. The scouts report movement to the north. A new drop pod, 3 prisoners still alive. Nodded, send a rescue team. Standard protocol, bring them here before the acid rain starts. The Vex swarm scattered, moving faster than any single creature could manage. Within minutes, a rescue team had assembled and headed north, armed with weapons and carrying extra supplies. This was how it worked now. Every drop was an opportunity. Every new prisoner was a potential ally. Most of them were too broken, too afraid, or too injured to be useful right away, but had learned something important in his 6 months on Sector Null. Everyone had value, you just had to find it. The rescue team returned 3 hours later with 2 survivors. The third had not made it, killed by a predator minutes before the team arrived. The 2 survivors were a mated pair of reptilian creatures called. They hissed and snapped at anyone who came close, terrified and confused. Approached them slowly, his hands visible and empty. You are safe, he said in common tongue. No one will hurt you here. We have food, we have water, we have walls. All we ask is that you contribute what you can." The female stopped hissing. She stared at with eyes that had seen too much. "Why?" she asked. "Why help us? We are strangers, enemies maybe." Smiled. It was not a happy smile, but it was real. "Because I am human," he said, "and humans are very bad at accepting when things are impossible. The Dominion says we should all die here. I say no. I say we live. I say we build. And I say we do it together." The male lowered his defensive posture. "The Dominion murdered our children," he said quietly. "They burned our colony because we would not pay their taxes. They sent us here to disappear." "Then help me make them regret it," replied. "Help me build something so strong, so impossible, that the Dominion cannot ignore it. Help me show them what the unwanted can do." They looked at each other, then slowly they nodded. 2 more recruits, 2 more survivors, 2 more people who had chosen to live instead of die. By month 8, the compound's population had reached 100. By month 9, it had doubled. Word spread among the prisoners scattered across Sector Null's surface. There was a place where you could be safe. There was a place where species that had been engineered to hate each other lived side by side. There was a human leading it all, a strange creature from a young planet who seemed to believe that anything was possible. Some came out of desperation. Some came out of curiosity. Some came because they had nothing left to lose. All of them stayed. Stood before his council a group of leaders from each species in the compound. Around the table sat his first ally, the scientist whose name was the leader, a massive creature called representatives from the Vex, and a dozen other species. "We have survived," said, "but survival is not enough. The Dominion still watches. They know we are here. Someday they will decide we are a threat and send ships to destroy us." "Then what do you suggest?" asked. "We cannot fight warships with spears and stones." Pointed upward toward the sky they could not see through the compound's roof. "There is a monitoring station in orbit, old, abandoned, but still functional. It has ships, it has weapons, it has a communications array that can reach every corner of the galaxy." Silence fell over the council. "You want to capture it," said slowly. "You want to take the station." Nodded. "I want us to stop being prisoners. I want us to become something the Dominion has never seen before, a nation built from their garbage, a power created from their rejects." "This is madness," one of the representatives said. "We are prisoners, criminals. We have no ships, no technology, no way to reach orbit." "Not yet," agreed. "But we have something more important. We have 200 people who have survived the unsurvivable. We have engineers, scientists, warriors. We have every skill the galaxy has to offer, all thrown together in one place." He looked around the table, meeting every eye. "The Dominion made us into garbage. Now let us show them what garbage can become." The vote was unanimous. Training began the next day. Ambassador was drinking her morning coffee when the transmission arrived. It came through 17 relay stations, bounced off 3 military satellites, and passed through encryption so old that most computers did not even recognize it anymore. Her coffee cup shattered on the floor. The message was written in a code that had not been used in over a century. A code from the Korean Unification Wars, when her grandmother had fought in the mountains and electronic communication could not be trusted. A code that only a handful of people in the entire galaxy knew. "Ready for extraction. Bringing friends. Tell the Dominion we are coming out." Read the message 3 times. Then she locked her office door, disabled all recording devices, and began making calls. Admiral Park arrived within 2 hours. He was a large man with a face like carved stone and eyes that had seen too much war. He ran Earth's Rapid Response Division, a military unit so classified that most of humanity did not know it existed. "Is this real?" he asked, studying the message on screen. "The code is real," replied. The routing pattern matches what we expected, and the timing is right. Has been on Sector Null for 18 months. If anyone could survive that long and find a way to contact us, it would be him. Sat down heavily. Bringing friends, what does that mean? I do not know, but I intend to find out. Over the next week and assembled a team. It was not a rescue mission, not exactly. A rescue mission implied that they would be saving someone helpless. His message suggested something very different. They prepared for war. Meanwhile, 18 months of work had transformed Sector Null. The compound had grown into a city. 500 survivors now lived within its walls, representing over 30 different species. They had farms growing in underground caves, fed by artificial light. They had factories producing weapons and tools. They had schools where young prisoners born on the Death Planet learned to read and write and fight. And they had ships. It had taken 6 months to build the first one. A salvage team had found the wreckage of an old Dominion transport, crashed in a ravine 200 kilometers from the compound. The engine was destroyed, but the hull was intact. Had organized teams to drag it back piece by piece, through acid storms and predator attacks and terrain that killed anyone who was not careful. 3 engineers died in the recovery effort. Their names were carved into the wall of the compound, alongside all the others who had given their lives for this dream. But the ship was rebuilt, and then another, and then another. Now 12 crewed vessels sat in a hidden hangar, waiting for the day they would fly. Stood before his army on the day they had all been waiting for. 200 warriors, drawn from every species in the compound, stood in formation. They wore armor made from predator hide and volcanic glass. They carried weapons forged in fires that burned with chemicals no other world possessed. They were the ugliest army the galaxy had ever seen. They were also the most dangerous. 18 months ago, said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, the Dominion threw us away. They called this planet their deadliest zone. They said nothing could survive here. They said we would die in hours. He paused, letting the words sink in. They were wrong. A rumble of agreement went through the crowd. Fists struck chests. Weapons were raised. The sound of it echoed off the walls of the hangar like thunder. Today we stop hiding. Today we stop surviving. Today we take what is ours. Pointed toward the ceiling, toward the sky beyond. That station has watched us for months. Its crew thinks we are animals, too stupid to know they are there. They are about to learn differently. He raised his obsidian blade, the same one he had made on his first day on Sector Null. For everyone who died to bring us here, for everyone who will never see their home again, for every species the Dominion has crushed under its heel. His voice rose to a shout. We rise. The army roared back at him. The sound was deafening, terrifying, beautiful. The assault began at midnight. The 12 ships launched in silence, their engines modified to produce minimal heat signatures. They rose through the toxic atmosphere, through the acid clouds, through the layers of poison that had protected Sector Null from the rest of the galaxy. Above them, the monitoring station hung in orbit like a sleeping beast. Its lights were dim. Its weapons were offline. Its crew of 23 had spent years watching a planet where nothing ever changed. They never saw the attack coming. Ship was the first to dock. The airlock hissed open and he led his team into the station's corridors, moving fast and quiet. Behind him came his 4 arms holding 4 different weapons. Behind came a team of their massive bodies filling the narrow passages. The first guard they encountered died before he could make a sound. The second managed to trigger an alarm, but by then it was too late. The station's corridors were filled with prisoners, pouring in from every docking port. The battle lasted 17 minutes. Supervisor was in the control room when the doors burst open. She reached for her weapon, but a hand closed around her wrist before she could raise it. She looked up into the face of the human she had been watching for 18 months. "Hello," said calmly. "My name is, I believe you have been studying me." His teeth clicked in terror. How is any of this possible?" "I am human," replied. "We are very good at doing impossible things." He released her wrist and stepped back. Around the control room, her crew was being secured by alien prisoners. No one had been killed unnecessarily. No one had been tortured. The prisoners were brutal, yes, but they were also disciplined. "You have a choice," continued. "You can fight us and you will lose, or you can help us and live. The Dominion abandoned this station years ago. They do not care about you. They will not rescue you, but we will treat you fairly if you cooperate." Looked at her crew. She looked at the prisoners surrounding them. She looked at the human standing before her, dressed in rags and armor made from monsters, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Certainty, complete and absolute certainty. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. Smiled. "I want to send a message." 30 minutes later, the station's communications array hummed to life. A signal burst outward, reaching relay stations across the galaxy. It carried a simple message, broadcast on every frequency the Dominion monitored. "This is the Null Collective. We are the survivors of Sector Null. We are no longer prisoners. We are no longer forgotten. We are coming, and we have much to discuss." On Earth, Ambassador received the broadcast and began to laugh. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had just watched the impossible become real. "Admiral," she said, turning to Park, "I think our rescue mission just became something very different." Nodded slowly, his stone face cracking into something that might have been a smile. "It seems has been busy." "He has been doing what humans do," replied. "He has been refusing to accept reality, and now reality is going to have to adjust." In the monitoring station orbiting Sector Null, stood at the window and looked down at the planet that had tried so hard to kill him. Its surface was still deadly. Its atmosphere was still poison. Its creatures were still hungry. But it was no longer a prison. It was a nation. And this was only the beginning. The Galactic Tribunal Hall had not been this crowded in a century. Every seat was filled. Every balcony was packed. Species that hated each other stood shoulder to shoulder, united by the same burning curiosity. They all wanted to see the human. It had been 18 months since the Null Collective's message shocked the galaxy. In that time, everything had changed. The Dominion had sent 3 fleets to destroy the rebellious prisoners. All 3 had been defeated, not by superior weapons or numbers, but by tactics so strange, so unpredictable, that the Dominion admirals could not understand them until it was too late. The humans called it guerrilla warfare. Hit and run, strike from nowhere and vanish into the dark, use the enemy's strength against them. It was an ancient art on Earth, developed over thousands of years of human conflict. The Dominion had never seen anything like it. Now a treaty had been called. The Null Collective had been invited to the tribunal, not as prisoners, but as representatives of a new power. It was the greatest humiliation in Dominion history, and everyone wanted to watch. The doors of the great hall swung open. Walked in alone. He was not the same man who had stood on this platform 18 months ago. His body was covered in scars, souvenirs from battles and accidents, and the 1,000 small injuries that came from surviving the unsurvivable. His face was harder, aged beyond his years. His eyes held a weight that made some of the weaker species look away. But he walked like a king. Behind him, broadcast on every screen in the chamber, images played from Sector Null. The Death Planet had been transformed. Cities rose from the volcanic plains. Farms stretched across land that had once been nothing but poison. Ships flew through the toxic atmosphere, carrying people and supplies between settlements. 5,000 beings now called Sector Null home. Former prisoners from 50 different species, all living together under one flag. The Null Collective had become the galaxy's strangest nation, built from garbage and governed by outcasts. And at its heart was a human who simply refused to die. The chief arbiter sat on his throne, his compound eyes fixed on. He was the same who had sentenced the human to death. He looked older now, weaker. The war had cost the Dominion more than ships and soldiers. It had cost them their reputation. Of the Null Collective, the arbiter said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. You have been called before this tribunal to negotiate terms of peace. Do you speak for your people? Stopped in the center of the platform. He did not kneel. He did not bow. He simply stood there, looking up at the thousands of faces staring down at him. I speak for the collective, he said, but I also speak for myself, and I have things to say that this tribunal needs to hear. The arbiter's mandibles clicked nervously. Speak then. Activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air above him, showing documents, data, recordings that the Dominion had tried very hard to keep secret. When you sent me to Sector Null, began, you called it a garbage dump, a place to throw away your unwanted, but we found something interesting in your garbage. He gestured to the display. Chemical formulas appeared, complex chains of molecules that meant nothing to most of the audience. These are the biological weapons you dumped on Sector Null over the last 3 centuries. Failed experiments, you called them. Too dangerous to keep, too valuable to destroy. So you threw them on a planet of prisoners and forgot about them. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But they were not weapons, continued. Our scientists, the same scientists you threw away, studied them for months. They are not designed to kill. They are designed to cure. The murmurs became shouts. Delegates rose from their seats. The arbiter struck his staff against the floor, demanding silence. These organisms can neutralize diseases, said over the noise. Diseases that affect 37 different species. Diseases that your Dominion created and deployed as weapons of control. Plagues that killed millions on worlds that refused to submit to your rule. The hall erupted into chaos. Stood calmly in the center of the storm, letting the accusations fly around him. Species were turning on each other. Old suspicions were becoming fresh wounds. The Dominion's representatives were surrounded by angry delegates demanding answers. Finally, the arbiter managed to restore order. His voice was shaking when he spoke. These are serious accusations. Do you have proof? Smiled, it was not a kind smile. I have more than proof. I have the cures themselves. They are the only copies in existence. The Dominion destroyed all records of their development. They thought Sector Null would destroy the evidence forever. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But you did not count on us. You did not count on prisoners working together. You did not count on scientists continuing their research even while fighting for survival. And you certainly did not count on a human leading them. The hall was silent now. Every eye was fixed on the small figure standing alone on the platform. So here is what happens next, said. The Null Collective controls the only supply of those cures. We also control a planet that your civilization deemed worthless. A planet that, under human leadership, became something you never thought possible. He stepped forward, and despite the guards standing ready, no one moved to stop him. You will recognize the Null Collective as a sovereign state. You will grant full citizenship rights to every species the Dominion has wronged. You will pay reparations to the families of those you murdered. And you will open your records, all of them, to independent investigation. The arbiter's voice was barely a whisper. And if we refuse? Then we release the evidence to every news network in the galaxy. We let every species see exactly what the Dominion has done, and we watch your empire tear itself apart. His voice dropped low. I spent 18 months on a planet that wanted to kill me every single day. I have watched friends die in my arms. I have done things that will haunt me until I die. Do not think for one moment that I am bluffing. Silence stretched through the hall. Then slowly, the arbiter bowed his head. We accept your terms. The next 10 years changed everything. The Dominion did not fall, but it transformed. New laws were passed. Old crimes were acknowledged. Species that had been oppressed for generations began to reclaim their power. It was not easy. It was not peaceful, but it was progress. And at the center of it all stood the Null Collective. On the anniversary of his arrival on Sector Null, stood on the observation deck of the capital city and watched ships from 100 worlds dock at their ports. The poisoned planet had become a symbol of hope. If civilization could be built here, in the deadliest zone in the galaxy, then it could be built anywhere. Ambassador stood beside him, her gray hair now completely white. She had retired from official service years ago, but she always visited on this day. They still do not understand, do they? She asked quietly. How you did it? Shook his head. They look at humans and see a young species, barely space-faring, no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. They think we survived by luck. And what do you tell them? Turned to face her. His scars caught the red light of Sector Null's sun, turning his face into a map of everything he had endured. I tell them the truth. We spent our entire evolution fighting the weather, fighting predators, fighting each other. We survived ice ages that lasted thousands of years. We survived plagues that killed half our population. We built civilizations in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. He looked out at the city he had built, at the impossible nation that had risen from ashes and garbage and sheer human stubbornness. They dropped me on their deadliest planet and expected me to die, but for a human, he smiled, and this time there was warmth in it. That place was just Tuesday. Laughed. It was a sound she had not made in years. So what comes next? She asked. What do you do after you have done the impossible? Considered the question. Below them, a family walked through a market square, shopping alongside traders and construction workers. Children of a dozen species played together in parks that had been acid pits just a decade ago. Former prisoners who had once been sworn enemies now shared meals and stories and dreams for the future. I do it again, said simply, and again, until impossible is just another word for not yet. He put his hand on shoulder and guided her toward the elevator. Come on, he said. The council meeting starts in an hour, and there is a whole galaxy left to change. They walked together into the heart of the city that should not exist, built by people who should have died, led by a human who should have known better. But knowing better had never been humanity's strength. Refusing to give up was. And the galaxy, slowly but surely, was learning what that meant.